2021 was a landmark year for the city of Coventry, the year it was awarded the title UK City of Culture, bringing artists, musicians, actors, directors, community groups, schools and faith communities, not to mention ordinary members of its nearly 350,000 strong population, together to celebrate the city's cultural past, present and future. Instrumental in paving the way for such an accolade was the 2015 report by the Warwick Commission on the Future of Cultural Value, which helped produce the academic research that contributed to the successful bid. And in this Core Insights podcast, showing how Warwick research feeds into the world beyond the campus, I've been speaking to Jonothan Neelands, Professor of Creative Education here at Warwick Business School, who's been telling me what the Commission, and in particular its members drawn from academia, were trying to achieve.
So the Warwick Commission on the Future of Cultural Value was set up in 2013 and reported in 2015. And we appointed a number of commissioners who are all significant leaders in the cultural sector and also in the business sector. And we ran the commission as a select committee style. So we brought in researchers and academics to give evidence to the commissioners. And on the basis of that, the commissioners put the report together and launched the report under their authorship. And at the time, the preoccupations were to do with the understanding that the commercially successful creative industries were dependent upon the publicly funded cultural industries for their success in all kinds of ways: exchange of talent, exchange of ideas, the training that comes through public routes, but also the importance of providing cultural locations for the creative industries that was dynamic, vibrant, multicultural, expressive. So it was about suggesting that there was a cultural and creative ecosystem, and in order to preserve the commercially successful end, you also needed to invest in the publicly supported end to make it work. But we also asked questions about who benefits from publicly funded culture. And our evidence showed that there's 8% of the population who are also tend to be white, older, more qualified and living in the southeast who disproportionately benefit from public funding in culture, and that this was a challenge to the sector. We all pay for public culture through lottery and tax. We're all entitled to benefit from it. So it was very much making that argument, and also looking at the lack of diversity, not just in audiences, but in cultural producers, cultural makers, artists, directors, writers, or the rest of it. So we're making those points as well.
Now, on the commission, as you say, you had broadcasters, curators, theatre professionals, musicians, and so on. So they could tell you all about television, for example, how to run a museum, mount a show, put on a concert, and so on. What did you as an academic bring to the table?
Well, we brought the research. We provided the evidence, for instance, that there was a disproportionate benefit to a small percentage of the population from publicly funded culture. We provided the research that showed the lack of diversity amongst cultural leaders and cultural programmers. I mean, a lot of this is now commonly accepted knowledge. You know, following the commission, there were campaigns across the publicly funded cultural sector to increase diversity, to increase new audiences, and that all came out of the research that we provided. So this was probably the most thoroughly researched, thoroughly referenced cultural report that we'd seen to date, and set a precedent, I think, for future cultural reporting, which relies a lot more now on data rather than opinion as to what's going on.
Well, let's explore that difference between data and opinion for a moment. What was your methodology? And again, what could you bring in the way of academic rigour that went beyond feelings and impressions?
Well, we drew on our own research, but we also drew on significant research from experts in the field in terms of all the areas that we were looking at. So part of our job also was to curate all of that evidence and provide it as presentations to the commission so that they could make judgment on it. So it was research informed, and that research was partly our own and partly curating research that came from other sources and putting them into a comprehensive and coherent package for the commissioners to deliberate on and arrive at their findings. So we researched to prove the point that publicly funded culture is essential to the success of the commercial creative industries. We did the research to show who benefits from and who doesn't benefit from publicly funded culture. And we did the research to show that there was a disproportionate amount of public funding went to London and the South East, and made the argument for a place-based approach to cultural growth and for cultural investment. So we provided the evidence on which that rested, which then, got wide acceptance across the cultural sector, but also from policymakers, also from government.
And what form did that research take? I mean, did it involve questionnaires, market research, public consultations, meetings at City Hall, or what?
Well, a lot of it was desk-based research. A lot of it was doing literature reviews, doing rapid reviews of the evidence that was available, and bringing all of that together. There were public consultation meetings, 3 or 4 public consultation meetings around each of the themes of the commission. So they also provided evidence. And of course, our commissioners, as you said, were experts in their own right in their field. So they had a sense of to the extent to which this data was thorough and rigorous and robust and stood up to challenge, and challenged us back to make sure that we were collecting the right research and that we could stand by it.
Because isn't there a danger that when you go out to the public in the form of asking opinion or holding a meeting, you get a sort of self-selecting group? So you might advertise a meeting, but you'll only attract the people who like attending meetings, not perhaps the people on the fringe, the shy, the nervous, the inexperienced, perhaps those who even don't have a car to get them to the meeting. I mean, did you factor that into the research?
Well, we didn't rely on public consultation as the main source of data for the commission. The commission was designed to have maximum policy impact. The commission was always designed to inform government decisions about cultural priorities, and particularly priorities for investment. That's what it was designed to do. And that's why we selected the calibre of commissioners. And that's why we made sure that the research would stand up to Treasury and to other government departmental challenges if needs be. That was our principal purpose, was to show where the gaps were, to show where the lack was. We didn't go out to consultation in terms of mass surveys or trying to get representative samples, but we did go out to consult on the findings as they came to us. And the consultation didn't reach down to the general public. They reached down into the cultural sector. They reached down into the policy sector. They reached down into the creative industries, but not to the level of everyday audiences or everyday people. That wasn't the intention of the commission. It was clearly focused on change and how to put together a research-led project that would lead to change, which it certainly did. We should bear in mind that the Arts Council 10-year strategy, Let's Create, came directly out of the Commission's work. The idea that we're all creative, the idea that every place is creative and should be given its opportunity, the idea that we have to do more to increase diversity in cultural makers and leadership, all of that stemmed directly from the Commission. And 2 of our commissioners went on to be both the chair and the executive director of Arts Council England, and took the messages of the Commission with them. So in that sense, did the research-led commission have a significant impact on cultural policy and cultural investment? Yes, it absolutely did.
And the Commission did acknowledge that the creative ecosystem, as you put it, faces, quote, a governance reality. I'm quoting from the report now. And you admitted that cuts in funding, fluctuation in investment, training and education would all have a bearing on that. So for all its blue sky thinking, it did face hard-headed reality, didn't it?
It certainly did, and I think the one that hit hardest was the educational one, the extent to which young people in the public sector of education, the cuts to arts provision, the cuts to opportunities, cuts to training, cuts to talent pipelines, have had a significant effect and continue to have a significant effect on who participates, who makes, who produces culture in this country. And I think people were quite shocked by the evidence that we produced to support that picture of what was happening.
So didn't the whole experience come with, as it were, the built-in potential for disappointment, in that you might highlight the problems, but the solutions were out of your hands? They lay elsewhere.
Yeah. I think of all of the challenges that we raised, the educational one was the most complex, yes. It's very difficult to shift or change education. We were much more successful with the Treasury. We were much more successful with the Department for Culture, Media and Sports, much more successful with the International Department than we ever were with education. They're the most resistant to change, I would say. And despite the evidence we produced, they just produced defensive comments about the arts being in the national curriculum without really, accepting that we'd lost 50% of all of our drama teachers, 60% of all of our dance teachers, and the effects of the national curriculum were to significantly narrow the opportunities for working class young people and those outside London to experience the arts and discover whether or not they had a passion and whether they had any talent.
And of course, at the end of it all, you could say, look, these are our recommendations and they're not opinions or feelings. This is backed up by data, research and hard-headed academic rigour.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And again, education was the outlier here, but we discussed our recommendations with relevant departments and stakeholders before publication of the report, and the majority of them have been implemented since.
I mean, in broader terms, the question you asked yourselves was, and I'm afraid there's a bit of jargon here, how do you determine the metrics for evaluating the impact of art and culture? I wonder, are you any nearer answering that? Did you discover new ways of doing it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the publication of the commission coincided with Coventry deciding that it was going to bid to be UK City of Culture 2021. So it was absolutely my intention to come back to Coventry and walk the talk of the commission and think about, all right, well, if we're bidding, what is it we're trying to achieve? How will we measure it? How will we evaluate it? What metrics will we use? How can we turn Coventry into a living laboratory of what the commission was talking about and measure what changes we're able to bring about through the title of UK City of Culture 2021. So it was a practical opportunity to take the ideas, the abstracts, the recommendations from the commission and put them into living practice in a place like Coventry.
I mean, just as big an issue as finance or local or central government funding, I suppose, is participation. So how did you propose widening access and diversity within that creative ecosystem?
Our argument in the commission was that it isn't the case that some people are more cultural than others because they participate in mainstream culture. We're all cultural, we're all creative, every place has its culture. And what we were not doing was looking at what new audiences might be looking for and what kind of what changes in diversity of leadership, what changes that might lead to in terms of cultural participation as well. And diversity is the social engine of creativity, and that was very much our mantra. And that's certainly been the case in Coventry. So by applying our metrics, we're able to show that significant increases in cultural participation, particularly amongst those who benefited least in the past. And we've achieved that through programming very hyper-locally in people's neighbourhoods on their doorsteps, by telling their stories, by co-creating with local residents. We can significantly improve, and that's a model which could then be rolled out. So if you take the Belgrade Theatre, for instance, it was filling seats with a show called Fighting Irish, because that show was about the Irish community in Tile Hill in Coventry, who many of whom never came to Belgrade before, but they came because there was something that was about them and about their story and about their pride in themselves. So we're able to demonstrate that by programming locally, co-creating with residents, telling the stories that are relevant to them, broadening our understanding of what culture is. So it also includes at-home culture, family cultural activities, community culture, faith culture. You could change an understanding of what culture is, and you could certainly change an understanding of who participates in culture and why they participate in culture.
And that's a big thing. Equally big was the broad and forward-looking theme that the Commission had, namely, quote, the future of cultural values. How do you now see that future opening up?
As I said, I think the Arts Council England Let's Create 10-year strategy, manifests the Commission in all kinds of ways. It talks about celebrating everyday creativity. It talks about the the necessity of diversity in leadership and cultural production if you're going to attract new audiences. I think the future, where it leads to, is the idea of publicly funded culture as public culture, public service, like public health, like public education, that we all pay for it through lottery and tax. We're all entitled to benefit from it. And as long as, there's a very narrow percentile of the population who benefit from it, it's very difficult to attract additional funding and investment into culture. As long as most of the investment goes to London and the South East, it's very difficult for places outside of London to have the opportunity to participate more fully in their own cultural lives. So I think it changed the value that we put on a wider range of culture beyond the traditional, beyond the mainstream, new forms of cultural production, new manifestations of culture. So, food is culture, community theatre, amateur groups, they're all culture. They all need to be included in the mix. They all need to be celebrated. They all need to be supported.
And so when it came round to the City of Culture bid, what were you, again, as an academic, able to bring to proceedings?
Well, we obviously brought everything that we'd learned from the Commission so that we could, that defined the themes. And the City, of course, Coventry City Council leading the bid, were aware of the Commission and very keen to implement it and for it to establish the model for what we wanted to do with our City of Culture. So our bid was the first bid for a City of Culture that was research-led, research informed and evidence led. We were able to baseline participation. We were able to, we knew more about our city. We knew not just cultural data, but non-cultural data. We knew all about the inequalities in health, inequalities in educational levels. We knew all about which areas of the city were experiencing higher levels of multiple deprivation, which were also often higher levels of lack of participation in culture. So we were able to put into a bid research that showed that we really understood our people and we really understood our city, and we knew exactly what we would need to do if we were successful in order to invest in those people who needed it most and those areas that needed it most.
Now, this is perhaps a non-academic question, but when Coventry applied for the culture title, it was up against competition. And I'm wondering whether you, as a local boy, either by birth or adoption, in any way found the competitive element swaying or skewing what would normally have been an academic approach. In other words, did you park your objectivity and start rooting for the home team?
No, and I think that's what I mean. The distinction between our bid and other bids and previous bids is that it wasn't advocacy. It wasn't about a claim for what culture would do for us, and hyperbole about what we could achieve. It was based on grounded evidence, grounded data about the city, about its people, about what was lacking, about what we needed to do in order to bring about what for us was a city change movement, not just putting on a festival for a year. And I think that made us distinctive, and that's what our passion went into, wanting to deliver for the people and place, and therefore needing to understand from data what we could about people and place.
Because while people might have seen and enjoyed the bright lights, the plays, the shows, the concerts, as I'm sure you did, you could also say, and don't forget, this is every bit as important to the city as car manufacturing had been, or as industry and investment are to the life of any community and city.
That's right. That's right. And there was a lot of those post-industrial issues that we wanted to take on, of course. It was a city that had lost pride. It was a city that it wasn't quite sure of its identity coming out of the post-industrial. It was a younger city. It was a diverse city. That those qualities were not being celebrated particularly or understood particularly. So there was a big piece that was around increasing civic pride, improving perceptions of Coventry, both internally and externally, by including those who had traditionally been marginalised or seldom heard, to try and look at the riches that we have in the city, which maybe not been as fully developed as they should be. And we believe we're beginning to do so through the City of Culture and its legacy.
Now that's exactly where I was going to go next, because when it did win, that wasn't the end of it for you. There was a study into the 2-year legacy period. Again, as a Warwick academic, what was the supplementary information you were looking for when the cheering and the jubilation settled down?
So Warwick led the monitoring and evaluation for UK City of Culture 2021 in close partnership with Coventry University, Coventry City Council and the Coventry City Council and the Coventry City of Culture Trust. And we set out at the beginning a grounded theory of change. We set out very clearly what the outcomes and the impacts we were looking for. They were based on public consultation. So these were common outcomes and impacts that the city, as far as it's possible, agreed were what they wanted to see in terms of what change would look like as a result of the award of the title. And then all programming, all investment decisions were aligned to those outcomes and impacts. So everybody working towards the same common goals, if you like. But what we also did was to make sure that the outputs and the outcomes were measurable, and we established baseline and we established metrics, KPIs for each and every outcome and output, so that when it came to reporting, we could do that truthfully and we could do that with rigor and robustness.
And a reminder for the uninitiated, including myself, KPIs?
Key performance indicators.
So where next? I mean, armed with that information, is that it? Is the academic appraisal of the cultural landscape in Coventry now fixed? Or is that itself going to change in the future?
It is. I mean, we talk about UK City of Culture years, but they're not that. Every city, starts 5-6 years before pulling together the partnerships that are necessary to achieve the bid, and looks to that year to create for them a strong foundation for legacy. So that's been very true of Coventry, for instance, and true of the university as well. So the university's relationship with the place and people of Coventry is massively transformed as a result of the title. So our researchers are much more engaged now with local artists, with local communities. Our students are much more involved. The university has its own cultural strategy coming forward because it wants to make sure that it builds on the legacy of the investments that it made in City of Culture. And there's a very close relationship between the two universities now, which didn't exist before, which allows us to use our complementary research strengths and focus them on Coventry and understanding better what works in terms of widening participation for all, what works in terms of creating the partnerships and the legacy partnerships that will keep the momentum of City of Culture moving.
And are you still in touch as an academic with the artistic personnel involved, the artists, the actors, the directors, the musicians? Are they constantly feeding back information for you?
Yeah, no, we're very embedded now in a way that we weren't previously, and we're still very actively working with the sector. We're pursuing some big research funding to help us work with the sector and get a better understanding of what the drivers and obstacles to cultural participation and growth are. So that work will continue. I mean, we've got funding bids in the pipeline now that will keep us busy in the city for at least 3 to 4 years.
I mean, can you share with us at this stage what that research is likely to be looking at?
One of the things it's likely to look at is how do we measure the value of cultural assets? The Belgrade Theatre, for instance, it's a local city theatre. How do we value it? I mean, it'll have an economic impact in terms of tickets sold and other use value measurables, but it's also got not what we call non-use value. So what's the importance of Belgrade to the people of the city? Even if they don't go to Belgrade, is it important that it's there? What's the value of the outreach work that the Belgrade do in terms of raising levels of well-being or raising levels of civic pride? So get a more accurate measure of the broad range of values that are generated by cultural assets, and how to come up with a framework that will give us a more comprehensive understanding of what that value creates in a city like Coventry.
And presumably now you are a focus for and a repository of all that data. In other words, you've got the hard-headed information at your disposal, which any other city in Britain or Europe, for that matter, can draw on.
No, that's absolutely right. And I've always felt that a responsibility comes with being awarded the City of Culture title. It's a massive cultural investment in one place. So it's the responsibility of that place, and particularly its academics, to look at what has been learned, what works, what doesn't work so well, and make sure that's communicated out, not just to future cities of culture, but to the cultural sector more broadly, particularly any place that is interested in using culture as a way of transforming itself of, we will share our lessons, we will share our data with them so that we can all benefit from it.
Well, we began by asking what you as an academic could contribute to the whole process. Let's end by asking what you and your colleagues gained from the experience.
Well, non-academically, what we learned was the power of partnership and how if you establish strong civic partnerships, how that's good in and of itself, whether or not you become City of Culture or not. And those civic partnerships have extended the possibilities for our researchers, but also for us in terms of public engagement, influence on the city and the region, civic influence on the region. Social value was always really important to UK City of Culture. It wasn't just about making money and attracting visitors. It was about improving the quality of life and place for its residents. And during this period, Warwick Business School has emerged as a national leader in social value measurement through the work of Dr. Hayley Beer and others. And we want to build on that and take that forward. You know, it's been very good for us in so many ways. It's, in a relatively short period of time, completely transformed our relationship with the city and with the region. And that's good for research, that's good for teaching and learning, that's good for knowledge exchange, it's good for public engagement. So there are a lot of wins from it, I think, which we're keen to build on now.
Indeed, wins all round, for the business school and for the city. Jonathan, thank you. Jonothan Neelands, Professor of Creative Education. I'm Trevor Barnes, and this has been a Core Insights podcast for Warwick Business School.